Hello, my name is Anne Marie Cannon, and I'm the host of Armchair Historians. What's your favorite history? Each episode begins with this one question. Our guests come from all walks of life. YouTube celebrities, comedians, historians, even neighbors from the small mountain community that I live in. They're people who love history and get really excited about a particular time, place, or person from our distant or not so distant past. The jumping off point is the place where they became curious, then entered the rabbit hole into discovery. Fueled by an unrelenting need to know more, we look at history through the filter of other people's eyes. Armchair Historians is a Belgian Rabbit production. Stay up to date with us through Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Wherever you listen to your podcast, that is where you'll find us. Armchair Historians is an independent, commercial-free podcast. If you'd like to support the show and keep it ad-free, you can buy us a cup of coffee through Ko-fi, or you can become a patron through Patreon. Links to both in the episode notes. In this episode of Armchair Historians, I had the pleasure of talking to James McKissic a couple of weeks ago. James shared with me the story of his great-great-great-grandfather, Wilson Woods. It's quite a remarkable story. Now, I found this story by listening to another podcast, Historically Black. It's a good podcast. I highly recommend it. Without going into too much detail, I will tell you that Wilson Woods was born into slavery in the 1820s. And one of the most remarkable things about Wilson is that in 1868, he purchased a farm along the Tennessee River that is still in the family today. James McKissic, welcome, and thank you for being here today. So, what's your favorite history that we're going to be talking about today?
Well, Anne-Marie, first, thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk to you today. And my favorite history, which I'm going to share today, is about my ancestor, Wilson Woods.
Wilson Woods. So
Yeah.
I know a little bit about it because I found you through a wonderful podcast called Historically Black. And I was so stoked because I am a history genealogy geek, DNA. Hopefully we'll talk a little bit about your DNA results and what you found out. Tell us about Wilson. Tell us about this ancestor of yours.
Well, Wilson Woods was my great-great-great-grandfather, and he was enslaved in Meigs County, Tennessee. We think that, we know that he was a farmer, a person who grew things, and he was just a really incredible person because after emancipation, he went on to work and purchased land. And the exciting thing to me is that that land is still in my family today. So I always, love to take an opportunity to tell his story. And also, people reach out to me a lot about the podcast, Historically Black and his bill of sale and all of those things. So I'm just here to share today and dialogue.
Well, why don't you tell us about his story? I don't know the whole story. I know bits and pieces because of listening to the podcast, and the touchstone for that podcast was his bill of sale.
Yeah, so my family had a copy of his bill of sale for a while, and I had seen it. I'd never really thought much about it. I think that a lot of times people try to not think about those types of things. When the National Museum for African American and History and Culture opened up, which a lot of people call the Blacksonian, there were lots of opportunities to really share information about Black family history and celebrate Black heritage in our country. There was a blog that was collecting images of Black family artifacts to coincide with the opening of the museum. And it was the weirdest thing. I just one day did a screenshot of this document and sent it to them because I thought it might be interesting to people. And lo and behold, they used it on the blog. And I guess it was interesting because it led to being reached out to do a podcast from Minnesota Public Radio, the Historically Black podcast. It led to an article in the Washington Post, led to lots of other things that we can talk about too, but that was really the impetus for getting all of this started. I think that the wildest thing, though, to me was that it led to me actually being able to go to the courthouse in Meigs County, Tennessee, and see and touch and experience the real document, which was kind of breathtaking at that point.
And I was listening to the episode again last night, and they said that you and your mother put your hand on it.
Yeah.
And that was a moment. And what did that feel like?
It just felt like a moment to connect to him. Like, he was a real person. Really, I can visit his grave anytime because he's buried in our family cemetery, but that was just a slab with a name etched into it. You know, I had no concept of this person, but the document and actually seeing it in a book filled with other documents and, you know, in the calligraphy from the 19th century was just something to behold. And even, you know, the wildest part too was, you know, surrounding his bill of sale were the bill of sales of other Black people. But his had his name on it. You know, he was actually named. But many other ones just said things like a boy, two girls, you know, a man, a woman. And those people are attached to families too, but I just think, you know, they will never be able to really connect to their ancestor in that way because the names just do not exist. They were not even considered human enough to put a name. They were just property.
It's the thing that strikes me in doing research. I'm researching a woman named Clara Brown. Have you ever heard of her?
I know. I mean, I don't think so. Can you tell me a little about
Well,
her?
Clara Brown is a woman that came into, hers is one of those stories. Like she was a slave. She was born in 1800. In 1859, she gets her freedom. She was married and had a bunch of kids. And they got separated because the plantation owner died and the family sold off their property. Mm-hmm. And she never forgot about that. So when she was freed, she had to leave the state that she was in because at the time slavery still existed in the South, and it was before the Civil War. And so she had heard that one of her daughters had come out west. And so she found a way to get passage on, a wagon train coming out to Colorado. And she was 59 years old. Okay. And after that hard life that she lived, and the way she did it is she cleaned the laundry and made food for the people on the wagon train. She comes out to Central City area and she sets up a shop where she's doing laundry, but she's also a really good Christian woman. You know, she's always taking care of the needy, black or white, whatever. Out west, and when people are just trying to get it together, set up these, basically exploit the native lands, but set up these towns, the discrimination, I don't want to say it wasn't as bad because it was, but there were more people who were willing to work with the community. And she was one of those women that was people that was taken into the community. White and black alike respected her. So Aunt Clara doesn't find her children, but she sets up a laundry and she puts away $10,000 cleaning other people's clothes. She invests in an African American mining company here in the town I live in. She was even though she didn't live here, she had a lot of influence on this town. And when the Civil War was over, she took that money, she went back to the South, and she looked for her family and friends. She brought back 30 people that had been freed. A lot of them settled here in the town I live in. And she didn't find any of her children, but I think she found one of her nieces. Anyway, so they come here. She's spent all of her money on this venture. She's destitute because of it. But because she had won the love and respect of so many people, that people here in Colorado, a lot of people petitioned the government to give her a pioneer's pension. Women at the time did not get a pioneer's pension, but because they felt that she embodied the spirit of the pioneer in all positive ways, she was the first and maybe only, but I'm not sure about that, woman to collect the pioneer's pension. And she went.
That's fascinating.
It's an amazing story. I'm surprised more people don't know about her. That's become my goal. It
almost sounds like the script for a movie or something.
Oh, yeah, definitely. But I will tell you, there's one other caveat about this. In the end, just before she dies, she does find one of her daughters.
Oh,
and they're able to reconnect. And so, I don't know, as I was thinking about this show and interviewing you, I was thinking, I wonder if I could find her children. You know, like I'm having this thought, like maybe I can.
It's so hard though, because they could have, like when they were split up, they might have just been listed as, boy, girl, older boy. I mean,
well, we do have one known child from her. And if any of that, this is what I'm thinking, if any of the offspring of that child had their DNA done, I know it would be it would be a long life pursuit, but maybe somebody's already done it and I don't know it. But I've always felt this kinship with Aunt Clara from way before when I came here. And then I thought maybe.
And it's true that the DNA can open up so many different, just connections and opportunities. And, I can tell you stories about how after the podcast happened and, I did a DNA test, it just linked me to lots of new family members and new experiences. But yeah, if one of them did a DNA test and you had the descendant that do it, they could be connected.
It's stuff I'm thinking. We'll see. I have a lot of energy around it, so we'll see if I, how far I go with it. But let's get back to your family. And why don't you tell me the narrative of Wilson?
Wilson was born around, I think, 1820. It's so hard to pinpoint, because of the record keeping and whatnot. And the story that we always heard was, I'll tell you, the wild thing is that the story that we always heard in our family was that the land in our family came through Wilson's wife. And Sarah Taliaferro, who was Wilson's wife. Come to find out, with the research and everything, we understand now that that's not the case, that the land was actually purchased by Wilson. But Sarah played a huge part because one thing that I've learned is the way that the women in my family have preserved and maintained the land assets and passed them to the next generation. So even after Wilson died, Sarah held on to it, then passed it on to their children, who even some of those males died early, but their wives passed it on. And the land now has been inherited because my grandmother passed it on, who was married to a descendant of Wilson. His name was James Wood. That was my grandfather.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so, it's kind of interesting, too, like you said about Clara. On the farm, there's a cemetery that was used by the community and by the family, which is still there. There was a school and a church, like a one-room schoolhouse / church, which was built. It no longer exists, but the foundation is still there. But that was where the children, of course, would go to school, but also where the family would go to church, and other families from around the area would go to church. So there was a lot of that back then, especially after emancipation, of people pooling resources, working together, doing what they had to do as families and communities to provide the things that were needed, like education, like churches. And you really see that within our family too, and lots of other families. But what I did learn is that, Wilson did purchase his farm for around $2,000.
Wow. And what year was this?
This would have been like in I think 1880, around that period.
I wonder how much that would be worth today.
I know, right? Probably a lot. But that was what was so interesting, is that he worked after emancipation and I guess saved up his money and did purchase his land. And we even found evidence of what was growing on the land in some of the historical records. So he was growing things like tobacco, corn, he had pigs. I guess it was a typical homestead of, post-emancipation type homestead. And they lived and worked. They had lots of children. And
how many kids did they have?
So I think it was like 11 children total. Not all of them survived, though.
Okay. So one of the questions I have is, because I remember I was looking at your family tree last night, and it seems like some of those kids were born when he was still enslaved.
It does, yeah. I think some of them were born enslaved, and then some were born after emancipation, too.
Okay. So what do we know about his origins as far as his, his father, that type of thing?
So it's been, since the podcast, one thing that I've learned is, so one of my new cousins, and that's a story I can tell you about.
Awesome.
Reached out to Dr. Henry Louis Gates Jr. because they do a blog about Black genealogy on this website called The Root, and asked them, because there were some intricacies around the dates of when Wilson was born, when the document was signed, that just did not really add up. So Dr. Gates' team kind of looked into the situation.
Wow. Dr. Gates' team. He's like my favorite. Like, I was thinking about all the questions I want to ask you, and he always asks that questions. So what does it make you feel like when you see that document?
I know. So I told you what I felt like. But what we've learned is that Wilson is really possibly the brother of William and Samuel, the people who were doing the transaction, not so much the son of one of them. So we really feel like Wilson, Samuel, and William Woods, who are all part of the transaction, are brothers, and that Wilson was actually the son of the father. Yeah. Because it just, the way that Dr. Gates's description is that the people that were actually purchasing or transferring Wilson's ownership would have been too young to be Wilson's parent. They probably were more like brothers.
I see. That's interesting.
Yeah.
That is interesting.
But no one, I guess we'll never know. We just will never know.
Well, I think that one of the most interesting things is that Wilson is a family name, and that he was given a family name, and not to mistake in the fact that he was an enslaved person by his own father, siblings, whatever. But there does seem to be some indication that he might have had preferential treatment. I don't know. What do you think about that?
It could be. We do hear about that, where enslavers have children by enslaved women, and some of them, do things like try to keep them provided for. You also hear the opposite, where they have the children and they sell them, beat them, just do all the terror that comes with being an enslaved person.
Well, it's shades of gray, isn't it?
Yeah. And then too, this part of Tennessee, East Tennessee, is part that really resisted becoming part of the Confederacy for a while, but they still ended up doing it. But there was much more affiliation with the Union versus so much the Confederacy too.
They're all stories that are worth telling, but also, like you said, and I like that you brought it up, there were all these other bills of sales, to girls. That is as much of their story as we know, and we need to tell that story as we know it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and I like that you brought that up.
Because you think about what was going on in the individual's life, but there was this whole political and social environment, swirling around them too. So, and that's one of the things I thought was interesting. I had not gone back to the Historically Black website for a long time, but I see now that when they have the link to the podcast, they kind of put it in the context of what's going on. Like the bill of sale would have been signed like the year after the Civil War began, so there's so much going, like Abraham Lincoln elected president, Nat Turner and the rebellions happened before that, but afterward, it's in that period, but during the war and right before the Emancipation Proclamation.
Now we have this new piece of information that I didn't know about his father, which would make sense, what you said, what Dr. Gates said.
I think I'm going to trust what he says because, he's
been doing this.
But the other thing that they pointed out too is when you look at the bill of sale, you can tell that Wilson Wood, the white Wilson Wood, is William Wood is probably deceased or no longer in the area. That the document was actually signed and executed after the fact.
Okay.
Like after the transaction had already taken place.
I see. So now does it change where he's living or anything when the...
No, he continued living in the same area. The farm is in the same area. And then the children that he had, the one I'm descended from is a boy named Pink
Oh,
Woods.
Pink, I saw that name.
And that was his name. And he was a farmer, an herbalist, a very fascinating person, and lived for many years. And then he is the father of James Wood, who is my grandfather.
Okay. And now, did your mom grow up on the farm?
She did not grow up on the farm, but she grew up, with access to it and visiting it. In the period in their family history, like that nuclear family, some of the older children were born on the farm. And then they moved to a larger area called Cleveland as a family. And then a lot of the children were born there.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, but Cleveland is only like a 15 or 20-minute drive.
And the farm, what county is that in? Is that in Meigs?
It's in Meigs County, Tennessee. Yes.
So he goes from, was it a plantation that he lived on?
I don't even think it was a plantation. Okay. Like this part of East Tennessee is not really known for the big plantations. It's the enslaved people here were a lot more farm workers or skilled craftspersons, blacksmiths, things like that. And they were they were owned or enslaved by people in the community.
So then he gets his freedom is it the year before the Civil War ends?
Yes.
Because Tennessee is now under Union rule.
Mm-hmm. And we have a lot of there were some camps called contraband camps where, if you can imagine Tennessee, and our river kind of cuts through our state. Below the river, a lot of that was still Confederate. And above the river was Union. So a lot of people would escape across the river to the Union side and stay in camps or contraband camps because they were considered contraband, objects again. That was what was going on in a lot of places across.
So what
Tennessee.
side of the river was Wilson on
Wilson would have been on the south side of the river, but it is actually very close to the river, though. So the farm now, actually, there's another river that kind of feeds into the Tennessee River. It's called the Hiwassee River, and his farm is on the Hiwassee River.
And that's on the north side?
The south side.
How does he come into the money to buy this property? Do we know?
No one knows. I mean, he must have just worked and saved. I mean, I wish I had that
work ethic,
that ability to save. I have the work ethic, but it's the saving that I wish I
had both.
But yeah, saving and
you're saying that it was probably about 1880 when he bought the property. So he had 15 years. Aunt Clara saved $10,000 in a matter of a couple years. So
yeah, so it could be done.
So he was just determined. So were all of his children by Sarah?
To my understanding, they all were by Sarah.
So they were together. They were on the farm, the wood farm.
Mm-hmm.
So they were lifelong partners.
Yes, they were.
They had a lot of kids too. They had good genes.
Well, that's the interesting thing is that, so coming to more into the present, the descendants of those different kids, like some of them are still in the area, some are not, and then some we just never knew what happened, whether they had kids, whether they lived, who knows. But after taking the Ancestry DNA test, we actually found branches of the family, descendants of those other kids, and connected to them. A year later, like a year after the podcast and the articles and whatnot, we had a group of family members come to Tennessee, and we had a family reunion at the farm, and they got to go visit the courthouse to see the bill of sale, got to tour the lands, visit the cemetery. And these were people from California, Hawaii, St. Louis.
How many people about showed up?
There was at least, I would say, 80 that came. And that's not including the ones that all are from here who joined in and came together too. So
that is so amazing.
Yeah.
That's what I love about the DNA. It's that tangibility of, we share this ancestor. Yeah, even finding a document or another piece of the story. I love that. That's amazing.
And a lot of them were the ancestor or the descendants of Moses, who you probably see on the family tree. And Moses was the oldest child of Sarah and Wilson.
Okay.
And what we feel is that he immigrated, like many Black people did, north to St. Louis, and then that family grew and expanded from there.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah. So some stayed in the north, some stayed in the south, some stayed in the north. We have people in D.C., St. Louis, different places around the country.
That's amazing that you've been able to connect that way, and so many people found you through the DNA. Now, did those people have any idea until the DNA that this was their ancestor, that they were able to latch onto your tree and understand their history more?
I don't think...
That was a big epiphany for them.
It really was, because I think they knew the name of Moses, and Moses had a daughter who was named Magnolia, and that was like the person who really was the start of the large family there. So they were very intimately aware of them, but I don't think they had ever connected it back to Tennessee, and never, I guess, in their wildest dreams would think about actually connecting it to a place, like a plot,
Yeah.
coordinates on a map that they could
I would
actually
love
visit.
that tangibility of going to a place.
Yeah. But to me, and it's really sad to say this, and I had always had access to it my entire life. So I never thought of what a big deal it was. When I was growing up, I thought every family had a cemetery, that it was just the norm, that these things got passed down, that people could actually tell me stories about my ancestors. But it's not. And especially for a lot of Black families, it's not the case.
Right.
Because the history has just been erased or undocumented.
Yeah.
Or in some cases, the more violent or hurtful things have just been covered up and not discussed ever again. So, yeah.
I'm really grateful that you're here to share this history with me. When I started the podcast, I knew that I wanted to have these casual conversations with people about history. And as I've gotten into it, one of the things that I have really tried to do is seek out stories whose history has, like you said, been erased, has been hidden in the shadows. I really want to bring those stories out into the light because, the telling of history that I got when I was growing up was, the white male history. I'll just say that. I'll put it that way. And, it was not true. It was not the real history. And so there's so many different nuances. There's so many bigger things that we need to know about that we as human beings are capable of, in negative and positive. Yeah, when you agreed to be on the show, I'm just like, thank you so much.
Well, I was just going to say, what I've learned, especially over the past few years, is that you can tell the story through so many different lenses.
Yes.
And I think about Wilson's story, we could probably tell it from an indigenous lens, because they were being pushed out of the area, losing their land. We could tell the story from the lens of the white woman who's married to whomever Wilson's dad is. I mean, because she's watching him, have these relationships and, without consent with these Black women, that's a whole other story. There's a story that Wilson would tell. There's just all these lenses. And I think that the more lenses we can look at, or look at these stories through and look at history through, the richer it is. And a lot of what we hear in our country now is only tell it one way, like you said, that the one way, the white male version of history. And that's just not the case because, so many people were involved in the history of our country from different lives and different perspectives.
That was well put. So what else do we need to know about Wilson?
Well, if you would like to ever visit him, you can come to my family cemetery, which is in Meigs County. It's called the Woods Cemetery. It's not far from the banks of the Hiwassee River. It's a quiet place. I was out there not long ago because we had to bury one of our nephews, and I was just thinking to myself, like, so many of the people that I ever loved and the people who made me, are in this space, which makes it a really sacred place for me. And it's also a place where I have good memories. Like my dad would take us camping out there in the cemetery, which is probably where I've gotten my morbid sense of humor from those childhood experiences.
So is it a private cemetery? Or is it a community cemetery?
So it started more privately and it's on the family land. But there are some community aspects to it because at certain points in our state's history, for example, you might have an interracial couple back in the 70s or 80s. And they might have to be buried there and they might not be family members, but that might be the only cemetery that said, come on, you can be here. So it's for all family members and then people adjacent to the family as well.
So it's open to the public.
It is, yeah. You can, if you can find it. There's no sign.
That, you know what? That's a good thing. It'll protect it a lot longer.
If you can find it, it's open to the public. You can walk through. I mean, it's got new stones, from last year all the way back to just rocks from, the 19th century. So it's a fascinating place because, everyone some just didn't have, they just got buried right in the ground with a rock or with a stone or a wooden cross, just to mark where they had been. So, yeah, there are parts that are very primitive.
So, what is the one thing you want my listeners to remember about this history?
I would just remember that, as we explore genealogy and really celebrate our family histories, that we always keep in mind people who don't have that ability or for whom it's much harder because of the way that their ancestors were recorded in our country's history, recorded and regarded, And I'm lucky because I do have the name and I can trace the name to the person, and then I can work to trace the names back, another generation. But all of us don't have that. So I just think we should just be aware that genealogy is tough and it's tougher for some people.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you want to share about the history or about your family or something I didn't ask you?
No, I wanted to just say, thank you for the opportunity to share. And I'll try to send you the links to that Henry Louis Gates article and anything else that your listeners might be interested in. And if they want to reach out to me and just talk or share, I would love that too. Because I love hearing other people's family histories as well.
I do too.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed talking to you today, James. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, and thanks for the opportunity to share with other armchair historians.
Oh, I like that. Nobody's ever said that. There you have it. James McKissic and his great-great-great-grandfather, Wilson Woods. For more on Wilson Woods, including the Henry Louis Gates article, do check out our episode notes. Thanks for listening. Have a great week.